Thank you, Mike, for your kind introduction, and those caused me to reminisce about some years that passed long ago. I hope you've gotten the same impression that I'll start with, that Professor Shambaugh's book is indeed remarkable, and I think most readers and reviewers have and will conclude that. But I want to take a slightly different twist and emphasize the features that I think that make it remarkably good that may not necessarily be self-evident. The book is comprehensive on a topic where solid factual information on the PLA, of course, is not available to most Westerners. As David explained, he did his research in with original Chinese sources, both written materials and the interviews he mentioned with PLA officers and Chinese specialists on their military and security affairs. I remind all of you, and most of you in this room probably don't need this reminder, that this is a daunting task even for someone who's as highly proficient in Chinese as David is. We, the readers, benefit immensely then from the decades that he spent steeped in these issues. Yet I think he artfully combines clarity in his writing with exhaustive research, superb scholarship, and keen analysis. So I'm doing another thing here. There's some things that David is probably too modest to say about his book that I want to say in those sorts of terms. I have to mention, while we're talking about sources, that we were talking again last night. I suspect he's the only China security scholar who has played on the Beijing University basketball team, and it was a winning basketball team to boot. So his research probably goes beyond all that you can imagine. But beyond that, David knows as well or better than anyone in the field of China security studies the real issues that we're all interested in and how to distill what's useful to us to digest. He has, through a decade of hard work on this book and clear thinking, I argue, developed the materials in ways that are the most useful to us who are outside the PLA but who want to know about the PLA. I must add, however, that were this book to be published in Chinese, on the Chinese mainland, that it would be very revealing to many Chinese citizens. I suspect that it will not be published there, or if it is, it won't be made available to the public, but probably only to a very restricted group of readers. So when you read it, as you should, you can have the added titillation that you're learning things about the Chinese military to which most Chinese citizens will not have access. The book covers, as David alluded to, the period of development of the Chinese military in which we should be most interested, the recent period of modernization of the equipment, strategy, and doctrine, among other things. But it also takes us right up to date, even to an analysis of the implications for the PLA of the ongoing U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan. Professor Shambaugh's book does full justice to a complex subject while being readable and more than just interesting. Put another way, China and its military cannot usefully be put in simple black and white characterizations as some tend to do. David has given a controversial and often emotional subject a balanced treatment and incisive analysis. Let me offer some examples of this so that you might better appreciate the work he's done and so that you'll be tempted, as I highly recommend, to let David Shambaugh lead you along paths that reveal the light and shadow of the PLA, the problems, successes, daunting challenges, and intriguing conundrums that compose the world of Chinese military strategy and doctrine, force structure, military modernization, defense budgeting, threat analysis, much more of the things that David mentioned. And of course, as he mentioned at the end too, he also relates all these things to U.S. policy toward China and the implications of all this for the U.S. role in Asia and the world. The kind of question he addresses: is the PLA a party, state, or national army? Dr. Shambaugh takes on this PLA and it's an often very confusing issue and explains convincingly what the factors and trends are so that we can better follow future developments in the status of the PLA and its relations to the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. He rises above the level of oversimplified conclusions or colorful predictions and allows the reader to appreciate the forces at work in China with respect to the evolving status of the PLA. Yes, in the book you can read once more Mao's words about the party and the army, but the tale then builds to capture the relations and interplay among the party, the state, and the army in a modern China where all these institutions and their interactions are today changing rapidly. We come to appreciate, as we read his words, the folly of preconceived notions about even an institution that's easy to dislike and criticize, like the Chinese Communist Party. Along the way, we gain a full understanding of the changes in the PLA that are leading to more professionalism, that's easy to journalism, less corruption, and a narrower and more selective role in political decisions in China. We end up with a feeling that Dr. Shambaugh has lifted for us some of the several curtains that obscure party-state military relations in China, and that we've gained valuable insights into the larger perspective, civil-military relations in China, just as David titled his chapter on this intricate yet important aspect of a changing Chinese military. Is the PLA a current threat or a future threat to the United States, as David mentioned? The book helps us to put military modernization in China in perspective. We can comprehend more clearly from David's explanation the role that the Taiwan issue plays in the changing force structure of the PLA, and see how Beijing manifests its concerns about a U.S. intervention in a Taiwan crisis. But David goes beyond that to help us see how the PLA is developing into a military for a China that, whether we dislike about a U.S. intervention, slow it, it is an emerging regional and global power with a military likely to match the new status of China. How much is China actually spending on military modernization and the operation of its armed forces? Professor Shambaugh has for many years been a leading figure in analyzing this formerly opaque puzzle about PLA funding. He puts it all together in this book and gives us remarkable insight into what the formal Chinese defense budget encompasses, historically and currently, and what defense items are funded by the extra budgetary sources of revenue. He clears much of the fog that shrouds military funding and helps us understand the budget and its applications, the recent real increases, and at least the likely range of revenue available to the PLA from all sources. He tackles complexity, controversy, and uncertainty on the budget issue, as in other areas, without the polemics that so often form or deform the debate on difficult topics concerning the PLA and China. Possibly most important, the relationship of the revenues to strategic intentions and priorities, development of doctrine, and evolution of force structure are skillfully illustrated. Dr. Shambaugh is not into name-calling when he examines Chinese strategic and doctrinal thinking and the factors behind them. His balanced treatment of this and many other topics allows us to appreciate both the Chinese perspective and the implications of Chinese thinking and actions for the United States and for China's neighbors. David in the book is into name-dropping, but I say this in a very positive sense. He provides us with valuable details concerning the personalities that compose China's senior military leadership. His descriptions are based on extensive knowledge of their backgrounds, accomplishments, their links to civilian and other military leaders, and even their personalities. Whether one is deeply interested in this biographic and professional information or not, one can gain an understanding of the type of people who lead the largest military in the world, a military that the U.S. Department of Defense has had trouble getting to know. Even now, the U.S. government struggles with the question of appropriate military-to-military relations with the PLA, as David mentioned. This book will be a reference document, in my view, for those who need to know straight information and who seek insightful analysis of the PLA. It'll be a primer for those who truly want to understand the intricacies of the Chinese military structure and thinking. It should be a Bible for those who want to or must gain in-depth appreciation for what is arguably the most important military organization in the world, second only to the U.S. Armed Forces in importance, I suggest. I make this grand assertion because in reading David's superb book, one becomes informed rather than polarized. Professor Shambaugh's work has informed rather than inflamed the debate about China and the PLA. The book reinforces my own long-held conviction, regardless of whether one likes or dislikes China, whether one agrees with Beijing or not, we have an obligation to understand China and its military. We have that obligation whether we expect to fight China, influence China, become a part. We have an obligation to China. This very thoughtful, scholarly, but readable book, Modernizing China's Military, Progress, Problems, and Prospects, is a key text for schooling ourselves better to deal with modern China and its important military. Thank you for listening, and I suspect David would welcome your questions, and I'll be happy to answer any too.
Well, thank you, Admiral McVaden, and thank you, David.